I was talking with a liberal, somewhat friendly with her, and she's a well-meaning person, and she states that she wishes that wages were more equitable, that everybody would make about the same amount. Okay, fine. Totally allowed to have that opinion. I know that it comes from a decent place. I happen to disagree. I don't think that works on an economic standpoint. But okay, you're allowed to have your opinion. We talk further, and then she asked me what it's like to live abroad. I say, it's great. You know, there are all sorts of advantages. And then she's like, yeah, I would really like to try it. I would really like to live life more cheaply, have a cheaper cost of living. And hey, I absolutely agree with her reason. It's one of the reasons that I enjoy living abroad. But once again, your thoughts are not congruent with your ideology that you just stated a few minutes ago. You see, there are a few reasons, and I'm going to explain this, why it is cheaper to live abroad versus the United States. First of all, in the US and Europe, you have a lot of regulations which drive up costs. For example, if you burn coal in China, you don't have nearly the same emissions regulations. You don't have nearly the same equipment to scrub the air because they want to get electricity to their citizens as cheaply as possible so that they stay in power, of course. But you don't have the same regulations that cost a lot of money. The same thing in medicine. You know, the US and Europe are rife with red tape that doesn't exist in China. Similarly, you have buildings. You know, why is rent so high, for example, in Los Angeles? Part of it, of course, is the demand to live in the fantastic weather city and all the infrastructure that is there. But the other thing is that there are so many onerous regulations when it comes to building anything that up the cost dramatically that aren't present in foreign nations. So that's part of the reason that rent also might be cheaper elsewhere. Most consumer goods are not that much cheaper elsewhere. There are things that are more expensive in the United States, less expensive in the United States, but commodities have a uniform price around the world. The number one reason why it is cheaper to live abroad in many, many countries is because of the cheaper labor, which again flies right in the face of what she was stating earlier to me. The US, of course, is awash with money, and being the world's reserve currency, and the fact that so much wealth has been created within our borders, and everyone's money is chasing goods and services and thus driving up costs. So what you happen to have is the osmotic flow of money. The concentration of wealth, the concentration of cash is far less in foreign lands. And as you reduce the barriers, for example, cheaper plane tickets, the internet, communications, it gets far easier to travel. Thus, the barriers that kept the concentration of money in America, like in osmosis, it begins to flow and become into equilibrium as you remove the barriers. And the same is true also for business, of course, not just for individuals, and mainly even for business. I mean, why would you want to pay an American a minimum wage of $15 an hour, to make, for example, garments for you, when you can take that whole production over to Cambodia and pay people slave wages of less than $1 an hour? I mean, these people work for $100 a month, but they held a strike and they tried to get an extra $5 a month and they got squashed. So you want to talk about labor rights. That's part of the reason that the cost of labor also is cheaper in foreign countries. So the cost of the goods and services that you buy on a competitive market go down as they move manufacturing overseas, and the wages of people in these countries slowly rises, as it has done in China, which has created a great middle class. There are many more people that are prosperous within Chinese borders today. So for example, another place are like two places that I've lived, Thailand and the Czech Republic. A pretty good salary there might be $1,000 a month for the locals. That is actually below the price of minimum wage within US borders, within all 50 states. Every single one of them. You're going to be making more than $1,000 a month if you work full time, but that is, again, a good salary elsewhere. So you want a super clean house? You can employ a full-time maid for $500 a month elsewhere. And in Beverly Hills, if you have a big house, that would be the cost of maybe 2 cleanings. That's for a full-time maid to do everything for you. And the same also holds true for professional services, maybe not for computer programmer because there's a worldwide market and demand for that, but stuff that's localized. So for example, a lawyer or a doctor or a nurse, all these people have gone to school for long periods of time in order to learn their profession, but because there isn't worldwide demand for their labor, it is localized, and because the concentration of money, again, is less in these areas, their wages are far, far lower than in the United States. Just as an example as to why people go on medical tourism, and not that this was our plan, but it just illustrates how much cheaper medicine is. Our daughter was born on December 30th. She was in emergency surgery on New Year's Eve. We were waiting outside as the clock struck midnight, and she spent the first 3 weeks of her life in NICU being treated around the clock, getting pumped full of antibiotics because she also developed staph, and she did survive. Very grateful. She's very healthy now. But for 3 weeks and the emergency surgery, the entire bill that I paid was $7,000. I would have to imagine that there would be $100,000 in the States. And yes, part of the reason is because you have far less red tape and bureaucracy that bloats the bill along with all sorts of government regulations. Again, bureaucracy. But really, one of the primary reasons is the fact that these doctors are not getting paid $400,000 a year, and you have to pay for their time. They might be lucky to be making $1,500 a month if they're even making that. So there's just a ginormous difference in the value of somebody's time. Look, there's nothing wrong with wanting a cheaper lifestyle. But let's not kid ourselves. The reason that you are in fact getting a cheaper cost of living is because you get to pay everyone far less for their labor than you would in Western Europe or the United States. I'm okay with that. And if you are, then that's great. But everybody should be aware of the primary reason why living abroad is so much cheaper before you tell me that I want everybody to be paid equally, and yet you want to take advantage of it. It's just hypocrisy, as I stated before, if you are aware. So just a little food for thought for you guys. If you're new, subscribe, notification bell, share the video. Most of all, have a fantastic day. Leave a comment with a thought if you feel that I've helped edify you on this subject.